I wanted to do some videos on level design specifically and architectural stuff because I find it interesting. One of the videos I had made, I mentioned the, like OSHA compliant stuff or like what, or like the non-compliant, like, OSHA hell or whatever type shit in games like Half-Life. And just that weird sort of abstract geometry, like impressionistic kind of thing going on with them, which I think is great. I love the shit. Um, I usually try to make stuff that I make more realistic, but I try to at least get a mix of both. Maybe not necessarily an equal mix, but as I had mentioned in one of the previous videos, most individuals that make levels, like I think part of the reason that they have this weird sort of hostile geometry type of look to them, is that most individuals they're just going off of essentially their visual memory of what stuff looks like. It's like how a lot of times the guns in a video game will be some weird mishmash of real world guns, and they just, they don't really understand what they're looking at, but they look vaguely similar, so they'll mishmash, different versions of the AK, or they'll have an AKM called an AK-47 or something, right? I think a lot of that is people don't really exactly understand architectural design, city planning, different building codes and regulations, or like OSHA compliance stuff and whatever. And of course, it varies country to country. Like, I unironically was fascinated when I found those elevator um, channels. Like, I've truly been watching like, I actually made a new folder for level design reference inspiration stuff. And I've started just saving elevator videos from all these different countries. One of the last ones that kind of helped make my point when I was talking about stairs in the last video or whatever from the other day, about how, like with stairs, there's like regulations or whatever for like the rise, the run, which is, the height of the stair, the run is the width of it, the part you put your foot on. But how different countries also have different codes on how often you have to have a land, they call it LAND. And it's basically, you know, a part that's wider than just a stair on its own. So, for an example, stairs are supposed to have lands at, like, like you're not supposed to open a door directly to a set of stairs. There's supposed to be a land first, or like there's supposed to be a land every so many steps, and different shit like that. Well, I was watching a Polish guy showing a particular. I mean, I was watching them from all over. One of them, there's this retcon. I don't know if I'll talk too much about this with Half-Life 2, but there's this weird retcon with Half-Life 2 that it's basically sort of pseudo-canonized by Half-Life Alyx, that Half-Life 2's universe allegedly exists in Sofia, Bulgaria, which is bullshit. It's always been a mishmash of different places. Video games are always kind of cobbled together like that. But one of the concept artists for Half-Life 2 was actually Bulgarian, but he also lived in France at a point. So if you look at his concept or his, reference photos, yeah, some of them are in Bulgaria, but you can also tell some of them are taken in France, right? So that's why, like I said, Half-Life 2 will have this weird mishmash of stuff. And, I've seen some of these I hadn't seen before because I've been thinking about a lot of stuff, recently. And something I looked up on the wiki was talking about that Half-Life 2 documentary, which I had totally forgot about. Because I believe it, at least at first, they want you to pay for it. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But a lot of that dude's reference photographs were apparently part of that documentary. But now you can just see them on the wiki. And, something I noticed is, they had I guess it's the train station that the one in Half-Life 2 is actually based off of, which apparently is in Bulgaria. But I mean, a lot of those kind of Slavic type of areas have similar designs anyway. And again, it's probably still a mishmash of stuff. But one of the things that I like looking at is, I pay attention to the little differences in the designs of all these different places, right? And one of the things I was looking at was the staircases. So, for example, the dude from Romania, the runs of the stairs were, all, in my opinion, they or at least looked wider than would be allowed on like an American staircase. Also, notice the staircases could be pretty high up without any sort of land to them. But then I noticed almost like an opposite thing on the Polish guy. And again, just because there's different building codes in different places, even in the United States, there are older structures that actually look more similar to a lot of these like Slavic kind of Eastern Europe designs or whatever. And so even though that there's codes, usually there's exceptions for buildings that already exist, right? And so that could be the same case in the other countries. So even if they have different building codes, well, if the place was built 100 years ago, it might not necessarily look like a modern building would look. But this Polish dude, he had an elevator video, and my personal fascination is actually more with staircases. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should just be like the staircase guy and just start making staircase videos. But kind of opposite of the Romanian dude that I was watching, this Polish dude making elevator videos. At one point, he was walking up a stairwell, and I noticed basically the opposite thing with their stairs, at least in that video. So in the Romanian one, it looked like it could be a whole, like the staircase, like the steps all the way up to the next level as one part with no land to it. But then on the Polish one, there was a land every like 5 steps all the way up. And there's all these different architectural terms, and I never remember them. And that's actually going to become a point here in a second when I do the video talking about that Team Fortress 2 map, where I talked more specifically about the architecture and different kind of level design issues that even experienced mappers have. But one of the terms I don't remember is there's a type of staircase design that was in this Polish video where it's not a spiral staircase, but it basically, it like, every quadrant, of like the walls or whatever, it like goes up, the different direction or whatever. I don't really know how to describe it. I can't remember what the fuck that's called, because there's like 2 different kinds. There's like a switchback where it's kind of like an overall U shape, and then there's, I don't know, whatever the fuck it is. But I noticed that all the way, it's like getting from one story to the other basically required doing a full rotation around those quadrants. But each of those quadrants had like, for every 5 steps, it had a land to it. I don't know. Like, that's the type of shit I pay attention to. Or like, as I mentioned with the stairs, the main vertical posts, like at the ends or like occasionally along the rail, is called a newel. Funny enough, like Gabe Newell, like I mentioned. But then there's like the little vertical pieces between there. Those are called balusters, not banisters, balusters. Or I should emphasize, right, balusters, right, like with an L. And then what most people call they say banister to mean handrail, but technically the banister is the biggest piece across the top that you actually put your hand on. But yeah, there's all sorts of crazy building codes, even for a fucking staircase. Like, you would think that would be like maybe one of the simplest things you could do in a level, but in reality, like even different states in the U.S. might have different codes, to the point to where, let's see, the banister is the top rail, but then there's also a name for that one that might run along the bottom near your feet. But like, they even have codes like how big those gaps could be between balusters and like the bottom part, and even like how it has to be measured on an angle if it's going down the staircase. And like, they'll do that specifically to make the gaps too small for like a kid to be able to fit their head in and get stuck or something. Like, there's all sorts of shit that you might never think about. And even if you're not consciously aware of it, it affects how the level feels aesthetically. And, you don't really see that a whole lot in practice. Like Kingpin Life of Crime, for example, one of my favorite games of all time, And yet it is very clearly this weird mix of like Los Angeles, New York City, Chicago, and all this other shit, right? I mean, like the last part, the very first level is called Skid Row, and then the last level is called Radio City, right? I mean, like, come on, you know. And you start with these, dilapidated warehouse buildings, and then the final level is all these, this big Art Deco skyscraper and all this shit. So video games always mishmash stuff, and I'm all for that. I think it's awesome. But there's also probably a reason that no one really tries to create a consistent art style. Because just like making stuff to spec ends up making levels that aren't fun because real life isn't usually optimized for gameplay. A lot of individuals just aren't aware of what exactly stuff is there for. Like if you ever look at industrial settings, all these random tanks and pipes that just kind of basically there for no reason. Or like you might be more aware of this if you've ever worked in a warehouse before or something like that. Like just how many guardrails and gates and chains and pylons and gigantic signs, and it's like you have to go through 3 different fucking barriers to access something because they just basically want to make really sure you don't fucking trip into something. And then at the same time, not every country's like that. Even in the United States, some places aren't built to code because they don't give a fuck, right? Or this or that. But most of the stuff, like I said, I think is more impressionistic. They're going off of this kind of vague idea or memory in their head of what stuff should look like, but then also visually designing it based off of how they feel thinking about it. Because, yeah, like that one part right before Follow Freeman with that like vertical part with the combine in it is like City 1713 or, whatever the fuck it is. Right after the fucking sewer bit and you like go all the way up. And it's just all these pipes and tanks that are essentially just there kind of for no reason, right? It's like there's no access. What is this weird suspended freight elevator thing there for? It doesn't go anywhere. You can't put anything in there. I mean, even the docks of City 17 on the coast map, or even like the docks in Sin Episodes Emergence make no sense. Like it just doors to nowhere, gates, or like, rolling doors that it's like maybe you could put the stuff in there, but then how the fuck do you get it out of there, right? But I think most level designers also will just want to put stuff in a level basically as like greebles, right? Just visual noise or just to make it look interesting and vaguely looks like it should be there. But what's interesting about it is, a like to code, so to speak, building like warehouse or whatever, at least in an American type of industrial environment, would have tons of shit in it. There's all sorts of fucking gates and barriers, and they're usually painted yellow or orange or like a white and red stripe pattern or whatever. It's on purpose so that to make sure you see them, right? But at the same time, a lot of real world stuff is not built to code or, in other countries, there's a lot of shit that it's real stuff, but if you saw it, you would think, it's like if a video game had that, you would think it was unrealistic. Nobody would ever make something like that. And it's like, no, that particular terrace or scaffold or whatever is that precarious, Like there was this cliff face or whatever with a, some type of like, walkway on it, and somewhere in India, what was like that. It's like the thinnest gauge metal of all time, and it just seems like it would fall over. Even if you weighed like 50 kilograms, I wouldn't trust it, right? And that reminded me, because I made that sort of joke on the Romanian dude, about his video. I seen that on another video of his. One of the buildings, or maybe it was a different Romanian guy, but one of the buildings had these like metal steps up to the very top that was kind of a partial floor, sort of like an access area. They looked the exact same. It was like the thinnest fucking metal, like the stairs didn't even have an actual real run to them. It was just these horizontal thin metal pieces And it's like, just begging to get your foot stuck in them. If you've ever worked on a mezzanine in a warehouse before, dude, deep treads on work boots could get stuck even in that. So it's like, I don't know if I'd trust that.